very much for being on the programme this evening. It's great to have you here. Just a few months ago, so many young people voted Labour at the election. Why didn't you tell them that you were going to put up tuition fees?
So I thought it was necessary to take the difficult decision today that I've announced in Parliament to increase fees. The reason was, on becoming Secretary of State for Education, I've been able to review everything in terms of the state of the sector. And I'm concerned about making sure that students have got universities to go to. And that's why it is necessary to put in place this extra investment into our universities. But this is not the end. I'm clear that there does have to be reform that runs alongside it, especially where it comes to better outcomes for students, especially students from less well-off backgrounds who don't always have the chance to go to university, even where that's what they would want, but where we also see real challenges around students completing their courses, especially, again, those from more disadvantaged backgrounds. So this was a difficult decision that I had to take, but I think a necessary one in order to stabilise the university sector.
I understand the arguments that this was a difficult but necessary decision, but what I'm struggling to accept is that this was only apparent after the election. I mean, you said in your statement to the House that it's been clear for 7 years that university funding was unsustainable. You know, in May, a group of vice-chancellors, former Labour ministers like Alan Johnson, Peter Mandelson, Margaret Hodge, warned universities would go bust without higher fees. So it was pretty clear for a long time that something like this would have to happen. Why weren't you honest with people?
Look, it is a complex area in terms of the wider modelling. What I've set out today is both an increase in the maintenance loan in line with inflation for students that will be up to £414 a year for less well-off students.
I'm talking about
that
why you weren't honest
increase
with people before the election when this has been clear, by your own admission, for years.
I was clear that I want to reform the system where it comes to funding and also the sector overall. I'm absolutely determined to do that. But what was necessary today was to put in place that extra investment directly into our universities, because I'm concerned that without it,
it was necessary.
Students will find that
you
places and courses don't exist. That's the trade-off. And I have been absolutely clear, both in the statement and publicly, with the sector. I do expect more where it comes to widening participation and access. They have a responsibility to do more around efficiency, to drive down waste, to look at pay of their senior executives. There is a lot more that we will demand in return from the sector. But this was a necessary decision, a tough decision, but one, as you say, that the Conservative Party had ducked for many years.
But you ducked it as well. This is my point. You know, you weren't saying, you know, before the election, look, guys, this is a mess. We're going to have to put up fees. You didn't say that in the last manifesto. You didn't say it in the manifesto before. I mean, 5 years ago, Keir Starmer was talking about scrapping tuition fees completely. What a journey he's been on.
Well, a lot's happened in that time, and I think
it hasn't. That's the problem.
Well, a lot has happened in that time. I mean, the state of the public finances, for one. So that does mean we've got some difficult choices. And I would also say that the decision that I've taken around universities today is an important decision in and of itself, but I think does have to be seen across the wider education system. So, for example, you know, the life chances of lots of children are determined by the age of 5. That's why I've made it my #1 priority
I want to talk to you about
around early years and childcare, because, you know, if we are to break that link between background and success, then we've got to do a lot more when our children are young. I also want to make sure that universities are doing a lot more to support students from less well-off backgrounds to have the chance to go to university. I'd also say alongside that, a lot more where it comes to providing opportunities for adults to upskill, to retrain, doing more with further education colleges too. There's some great practice, but there's also some practice that I think really needs change.
I want to talk about what you describe as your #1 priority, early years, in a moment. But just first on tuition fees, will you continue to uprate tuition fees alongside inflation throughout Parliament?
We're going to look at this and maintenance support and the sector overall as part of the reform that we intend to set out in the months to come. So no decision has been taken on what happens beyond this.
Is it not best just to be level with people, to be honest, that, look, this is going to have to keep going up every year? That would give the sector some certainty.
Look, what I was clear about both during the election campaign and since is that, of course, because there hasn't been an increase in the fee over 7 years, it means that that real terms value has declined considerably in that time. This is an important first step to reform of the sector. But I do want to look right across the board at what is required, not just to get our universities on a more sustainable footing, to make sure that they can be those engines of growth and opportunity that I know they can be, but also to deliver a better deal for students as a part of that too.
If you're uprating tuition fees with inflation, will you also uprate the threshold at which you need to start paying it back with inflation?
Again, that's something that we intend to look at as part of that wider reform.
But you can't say that that's going to happen.
We're not making that change now.
OK, then just finally on universities, you're talking about increasing maintenance loans for students from less well-off backgrounds. The point is, though, these are loans rather than grants. And if you look at research by the Sutton Trust, the founder of the Sutton Trust, for example, he would say that the poorest students are the most debt averse, so this increasingly deters them from going to university. Isn't the only thing you're doing is leaving more working class students who don't have the bank of mum and dad, more debt when they finish university?
University, the chance to be educated is a good thing in and of itself, but it is a long-term investment, both in your career opportunities and longer-term prospects, and that's as true for working class students as it is for anybody else. What I would say is I hear that. Nothing's off the table, but I do have to be upfront about the really big challenge that we face where it comes to the public finances. There are lots of areas right across our education where I would like to do more, to do it better, to do it faster. But, we are where we are in terms of the public finances. That does put constraints upon us. But in terms of fairness for students, in making sure that access to university and also completion of university courses, which is increasingly a challenge for working class students, the sector needs to do more on that too. We as government today have set out what we will do to support the sector. In return, we will be demanding a programme of reform that they will work with us to deliver.
It sounds to me like you've been pushing for grants rather than loans. Is that true?
I want to look across the board at the support that is required, absolutely.
It's not a denial.
Well, I think you look at the system and you do recognise the challenges that are there for working class students, of course, but I'm not going to make promises I can't deliver, and I am acutely aware of the pressures across education. And as we were just discussing there, around early years too, looking at where you can deliver really big, tangible changes to life chances. And as Education Secretary, I do have to balance sometimes competing pressures. That's the reality of where we are now.
I want to talk to you about early years, if I may, because you've spoken an awful lot about the need to improve early years. You just said that it's your number one priority, that kids' life chances are determined by the time they're 5. So I guess in my head I'm just trying to kind of marry that up with the impact of the budget on nurseries. Because, as you know, nurseries employ an awful lot of workers on low wages. The rise in employers' national insurance disproportionately hitting businesses like nurseries, already many of them struggling to keep afloat. This is Juna Sullivan, who's the founder of the Leaf Social Enterprise Nursery. She says it's a huge burden for us. Is the government trying to kill the early years sector?
So, of course, we will look at the impact on the sector. We're doing that work right now. Of course, many smaller providers will find...
You've done that before the budget.
Well, many smaller providers will find that with the changes to the employment allowance, they're not paying any national insurance at all. What I would say in addition is that at the final phase of the planned rollout in next September, we're talking about £8 billion a year going into the sector. But I'm not complacent about that. And at that point, the government will be paying for 80% of childcare, 80% government-backed childcare in this country. I don't think we're doing enough to work to support the sector around staffing, around pay and conditions, and much more besides. And as part of the early years strategy that we'll be setting out going into next year, working with the sector, I'm determined to deliver longer-term reform because, as with our universities, investment and reform have to go hand in hand. But I say to the sector, genuinely and sincerely, I want to work with them to overcome these longer-term challenges that we face. This is additional investment that they have seen through the budget, but I know that there is more that we need to do to make sure we've got the staff and we've got the really high-quality provision that does deliver brilliant life chances for children.
I guess this is, the issue, though, isn't it? You have been saying for years that, the free hours that nurseries have got have been underfunded by, the previous government. Now we've got nursery bosses saying, hang on a minute, our staffing costs are going up, the minimum wage is going up. Obviously, they want to pay their work as well, but it's an additional cost for business. They will have probably been so thankful that someone like you, talking about early years, has been in this job, and yet it must feel like a bit of a betrayal if they're worried about how to make ends meet. Did you lobby on their behalf for the budget? Did you not get what you wanted?
Well, in a really difficult fiscal environment, we've protected education priorities. That includes a commitment to up to £8 billion next year when the rollout runs through. That is a big investment, a really big investment. But I understand their frustration, of course I do, about the wider challenges that they see. And, we do need to reform the system, and we need to look you know, I haven't just been talking about the level of funding. I've also been talking for a long time about the complexity, the difficulties that parents face in accessing it, but also the problems that we see around places in the country. It's why we also in the budget put in place an additional £15 million to secure more primary-based nurseries, to make sure we're creating provision in areas where at the moment parents find the places just aren't there.
OK, thank you very much indeed.